For this etude, I'd like to split it up into 3 different sections for practice. We'll start by talking about the Playfully section, which is quarter note equals 104 from bar 1 to measure 21. The first thing I'd like to talk about is there's a 2/8 note motif throughout this section of music, which can be seen on beat 3 of bar 1, the B natural to the G. I'll go ahead and demonstrate that for you now. There's an accent on the first 8th note, and then there is a staccato on the second 8th note. And I like to think, instead of short, I like to think of releasing off the lip slur. So tia, tia, with an open vowel, so there's a little bit of ring. It'd be worth going through the piece at this point and working on each of those 8th note groupings to make sure that you have consistency throughout the movement. Next thing I'd like to talk about are the accents at the beginning of the piece. Notice that the marking is playfully, and I believe that these accents add a little bit of buoyancy or bounce or life to this section of the piece. So in other words, if I was going to play like orchestrally held notes so that each note is a brick and moves into the next note, you would lose some of the life and the playful nature of this section of the piece. I'll go ahead and demonstrate that for you now. Okay, by accenting, we add a little bit more energy to the beginning of the note, and there's a slight fade on each note, and that adds to that bouncy character. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate the contrast between the two now. So as you can see, there's a little bit more bounce and life to this section. All right, the next thing we run into is measure 3, some glissandos. And for those glissandos, I like to work on tuning the second note of the glissando with the stock position and the glissando position. So what I mean by that is B natural can be played in stock position, your regular position, in 4th position, and it can also be played on the same partial as E flat, so you get that gliss in 7th position. What I'd like to do for you is demonstrate that. So first I'm going to work on tuning that B natural in 7th. So I'm really having to reach out there for my B natural in 7th. That's what that exercise just told me. The next thing I like to do is to play, first of all, the stock positions, so E flat in 3rd and B natural in 4th. And then I like to work on the glissando positions, E flat in 3rd and then B natural in 7th, so I can work on tuning the interval. Okay, and once I get familiar with this, playing the glissandos is fairly easy when I get to this section of the piece. So I'd take a second and work on the glissandos in measure 3 and again in measure 10. Okay, the next thing to talk about is some alternate position ideas for bars 4 and 5, particularly bar 5. So you'll notice in bar 4 we have an E natural to a C, that 2/8 note grouping, on beat 3. I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that. Okay, by playing these two notes, I'm breaking across one partial. And when I say partial, I mean that they're the different frets on the instrument, okay, or different shelves, we like to say, on the instrument. So the first shelf is the fundamental, which holds all of your pedal notes. So that's your first partial. Your second partial has the B flat in the staff. So here's 3rd. And then that's 6th partial. Okay, so moving on to measure 5, if you play F sharp in 3rd and D in 1st on beat 1 of measure 5, you're actually moving across 2 partials. You hear that little break in between the 2 notes? You can work on cleaning this up, but I would just recommend in a high intensity performance situation, you might consider putting that D in flat 4th position so you don't catch that partial in between. Okay, So, the other thing I like about this alternate position is that it gives some continuity to the phrase in that you're moving from second to third, from E to C, and then third to fourth, F sharp to D, just going over one partial. So it really makes the two sound very similar. Okay, the other thing to talk about is when dealing with partials, we have to think about intonation on trombone. And the seventh partial, which is the partial with G and F sharp and F in fourth position, is naturally flat, so it needs to be brought in. So if you're having trouble hitting that G accurately, remember to bring that into a sharp second position. If you really work on tuning that note, it'll help you to attack that note cleanly. Okay? The other thing is the F sharps in sharp third. And then when we go down to sixth partial, which is the partial with F in first, E in second, E flat in third, and D in fourth, those notes are sharp, so you have to pull them down. So that's actually a flat fourth position for D. The next section of music, bars 6 through 9, has several little musical things I like to bring out. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the staccatos. For staccato, I don't like to think short. Again, I like to think separated so that there's a ring to it. Sometimes with short, that leads to doing things like tongue cutoffs. I'll go ahead and demonstrate that for you. That's like playing tut, tut, tut. And in doing so, we're really cutting off the tone in the phrase. I'll demonstrate. So you can see that that beautiful trombone sound just sounds like articulation noise. So instead of thinking tut, I'm going to think ta, ta. So it has an openness and a ring to it. And let's see what the difference is. So still separated, but with some ring. Okay? The other thing to talk about is the accents. Notice that in bar 8 we have an accent on each of those 2/16 8-note groupings leading to a staccato. So we really want to bring out that da-da-da, da-da-da, da. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and play this bar 6 through 9 for you so you can hear all the accents and staccatos. Okay, so by doing those little extra details, you can really bring your musical performance to the next level. The next section of music that I'd like to talk about is bars 11 through 13. And there's some musical things in this section that I think are worth bringing out and practicing, which are, there is a subito mezzo piano, which is significantly different than the volume you'll be playing by the time you get to bar 10 in your high range. So a very sudden, dynamic subito mezzo piano is very effective in this section. The next thing I'd like to talk about is your C flat on trigger trombone on bar 12 should be in a flat trigger second. Make sure that it's not in regular second because it's going to be sharp and will not sound pleasing. So make sure to pull it out. This will also help you center the note. The last thing I'd like to tell you about is that the accented low notes in this section, you should be dropping your jaw so that you get a nice open sound. Okay? And what I mean is, oftentimes with younger students, I'll see that the jaw is tight and you get sort of a very nasal sound. I'll demonstrate that for you. Notice it's pretty nasal and covered in quality. It's because my jaw is tight. So I'm going to open up my jaw and let's see what the difference is. So much more ringing and beautiful in this sense. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and why don't I start bar 10, I'll play all the way through bar 13, and listen for that subito mezzo piano, listen for the adjustment on that flat second vowel position, and listen for me dropping my jaw and opening up for those low notes. Okay. There's one last thing I'd like to talk about before we get to the fermata, which is the movement from duple meter to triple meter. You'll notice in bar 10 we have regular eighth notes, and bar 11 we have those triplet eighth notes. And making this transition smoothly is going to be important to maintaining the flow of time in the piece. So here's an exercise I like to do so that I'm not running out my chops. I'll pick a note that's fairly easy to play, like F in the staff, so I can play the exercise many times. And I'm going to go ahead and just play the rhythm from bars 10 to 11 until I feel like with a metronome that I'm comfortable making that transition. I'll demonstrate the exercise. Okay, so I'll work on this with a metronome until I'm comfortable with that transition. And that concludes this section of the piece.